The Catechism of the Catholic Church absolutely rules out the possibility of extraterrestrial incarnate intelligent life. In other words, it rejects aliens categorically. If you've seen any of my other videos against aliens, or if you've read any of my other writings on this point recently, you've already seen me address this point a bit. But the Catholic Church alien believers out there, they're desperate to try and wiggle out of this clear teaching from the Catechism. They use all sorts of sophistical pseudo-intellectual acrobatics. They've got several strategies for attempting to get out of this teaching. And here, today, I'm going to go ahead and definitively refute each and every one of them. So please stay tuned. This issue is absolutely dire and urgent for every person on the planet. A massive diabolical deception is coming very soon. It's going to put your soul's salvation at risk if you're not ready. And one of the best ways to be prepared for that coming deception is to realize that aliens do not exist. This is right up there with the importance of other related recognitions, that there's no such thing as good magic, that the zodiac sign reading is New Age nonsense, that your computer is not a person and cannot ever be a person. But it's probably even more essential than those extremely important things to realize that there are no aliens because of the universal nature of what is coming and how deeply diabolical it will be. So before I get into that refutation of aliens, I want to make a quick plea, because the alien believer crowd in the Catholic Church is getting enormous publicity right now. They've got one primary spokesman at the moment, a big shot PhD theologian, career lay apologist. He just published a big book on this. Most of the mainstream Catholic outlets out there are promoting this bogus view with everything they've got. I'm trying to counter this nonsense with the Orthodox Catholic truth here, the Orthodox Christian truth. And I have an utterly tiny amount of subscribers compared to those outlets that are promoting him. So I'm asking you to subscribe to this channel, to like this video, comment on it. Above all, get this video out there. Send it as far and wide as you can, especially to anyone who you think might have been exposed to the mainstream Catholic outlets' coverage of the incorrect side of this issue. Because right now, this is just me publishing to my own subscribers, and if that's all it winds up being, it'll be completely drowned out by the lies. And the lies are getting all the publicity right now by the big money in the Catholic mainstream media, the mainstream Catholic media, I should say. I, on the other hand, I'm just a dirt poor adjunct philosophy professor here in my basement, making a video in the middle of the night after all my kids are asleep, because I don't have a studio or anything I can record in. I figure you guys don't want to hear my 2-year-old having a tantrum in the next room, or the 4-year-old deciding that the living room right above me is a bouncy castle. So help me get this message out there. I can't do it without you guys. All right, on to the point. Here's what the Catechism says. It's very clear, and a faithful, obedient, submissive Catholic will have no trouble at all reading this and knowing what it means and what it rules out. Let's take a look. Paragraph 356. I'm going to read the first sentence here. Of all visible creatures, only man is able to know and love his Creator. Period. Let's stop right there. Let's focus on that dot there at the end of the sentence. As I said, that's called a period. You might have heard of these things. It means that a complete thought has been given. If you read something after that period and you decide that you more prefer what comes after the period, that doesn't mean you can dismiss what came before the period. So I'll get to what comes after the period in a couple of minutes here, but for now, let's look at what comes before it. The operative words here are all and only. Now, I trust that everyone knows what those words mean. I trust also that a good Catholic believes that the Catechism means what those words mean in using those words. Man, that is, human beings, of course, are the only visible, and visible means incarnate, the only visible creatures that exist anywhere who can know and love God. Any rational being, however, is by definition capable of knowing and loving God. That's also church teaching. For example, the Catechism says that God's existence, God can be known by reason alone. Just take a look at paragraph 47 of the Catechism. It says, and I quote, "The Church teaches that the one true God, our Creator and Lord, can be known with certainty from his works, by the natural light of human reason." And it's quoting there Vatican Council, the First Vatican Council there, as well as Denzinger. And it's saying that the Church teaches this. It's not only asserting it itself, it's saying the Church teaches. Whenever the Catechism says the Church teaches blank, I mean, everything in the Catechism we should be dead serious about. But when it's when a certain assertion is prefaced with that, you know it's triply certain. God's existence is absolutely knowable from reason alone. Those people who say, oh, you just have to take his existence on faith, they're lying, or maybe they just don't know what they're talking about. God can be known from that capacity of the soul which any rational being has merely by virtue of his rationality, merely by definition. So the point here is really obvious and unavoidable. Only men and angels can know and love God. So only men and angels are rational. In all creation, in everything that exists. Let's take a look at a few attempts, though, despite what has been said here. Let's take a look at a few of the attempts that the alien believers give to try and wiggle out of this one. The first thing they say is that all doesn't mean all. It means something completely contrary to the word all. I don't know how to address this right off the bat other than to encourage such people to stop pretending that they're obeying Catholic teaching. If you're going to explicitly reject what the Catechism says here and just assert without basis, to just assert that it means the opposite of what it says, then you are dissenting from church teaching. But the next attempt that they make is to play fast and loose with the word visible. A few people have been known to claim that by, quote, visible, the Catechism just means of all those things that we tend to see, that we generally see in our ordinary lives or something, those things that we often observe with our eyes. But that's not what the word visible means. If something is visible, that just means that it is possible to be seen. It is, in other words, it's corporeal, it's material, it's incarnate. And that's why I think about the Nicene Creed, which you hopefully pronounce with all your heart every Sunday at Mass at the minimum. We say in that creed that God is the maker of all things visible and invisible. And the point in that assertion, which we all must make as a matter of faith, is that by saying visible and invisible, that covers every possible reality. That's the logical axiom of the law of the excluded middle. You know, those two, that dichotomy, it splits all reality in half. And if you're referring to both halves of reality, you're referring to everything that exists, period. That's the distinction, visible and invisible. If visible just meant all things that we generally see, then the Nicene Creed would be quite mitigated in its scope, wouldn't it? It would fail to assert that God actually made everything that exists. If that's all that the word visible in church teaching meant, then the Nicene Creed would be failing to assert that God, for example, made the various undersea creatures that no one has seen yet. And I'm sure there's plenty. Who knows? And that's, of course, absurd. God made those. He made everything, visible and invisible. So visible just means everything. It means everything material, everything that can possibly be seen. The reason the Catechism says that is equally obvious, and the reason it brings that up. Angels, of course, we of course know that they can know and love God. And by angels, I'm speaking generally now of angels and demons. So the angels are fallen angels. Fallen angels don't love God, unfortunately, but they can. That's in their nature, they can. Angels, whether fallen or non-fallen, of course they can appear. They have great power over matter in all sorts of different ways that we can't get into right now. But in themselves, they're not visible creatures. They're spiritual beings. So the Catechism clarifies that of all visible creatures, only man has reason. Simple. All right, the next attempt that the alien believers in Catholicism use to try and wiggle out of this is even more subtle, and frankly, this one is irreverent. They say, okay, well, I'm still going to believe in aliens because maybe they exist, but because they do exist, they say actually, but God made it such that they actually can't know and love Him. That's special. That's just for us. That's just for human beings. Even though there are rational extraterrestrial incarnate beings, aliens. That is, first of all, logically impossible. As we already said, any rational being, by definition, can know and love God. That is inherent in the capacity of reason, the ability to know and love God. But really, more poignantly here, it's blasphemy against God's goodness. To say that God would make a rational being like us? Forget about what the details of the body looks like. We're made in the image of God primarily by virtue of our reason, by our soul. But for God to make such a being, but to make it such that that being couldn't know and love him, that is such an impious, blasphemous, irreverent affront to the infinite goodness of God. God would never make something with a rational nature that couldn't know him and love him. He loves everything that he made. He calls all things to their own perfection in accordance with their own nature. And the perfection of a rational being, it can't possibly be found apart from knowing and loving its creator. No other possible way. Now, the PhD theologians out there, they try yet another sneaky way of trying to get around this. They point to a teaching of Pope Pius XII in his encyclical Humani Generis. And in that encyclical, he taught that the beatific vision is a gratuitous gift from God. In other words, he's saying that heaven, the beatific vision, it's this supreme gift that God, he didn't absolutely have to, in justice, give simply from the demands of nature because we are rational beings. That was gratuitous. It was super abundant. He didn't have to do that, but he did. Now, that's obviously true. Definitely, that's a Catholic teaching. I certainly submit to that. In fact, not only do I submit to that, I've focused on that teaching in my own writings quite a bit in the past. So the alien believers, they're not telling us anything new by pointing that out, but it's a complete non sequitur. It's fallacious. It is a fallacy to attempt to conclude from that premise that God could nevertheless make a rational being, an alien, that couldn't know him and love him. I hope that everyone watching this video right now, I hope and pray everyone watching this video right now knows and loves God. And yet I can quite confidently say that you do not yet have the beatific vision. You're not in heaven yet. What I'm proving here by just pointing that out in 2 seconds is that these are two completely distinct situations. The beatific vision on one hand, and on the other hand, knowing and loving God. The beatific vision, God doesn't have to give to anyone. He will give to all those who trust in his mercy, but at the bare minimum, God's goodness absolutely, ontologically, metaphysically requires that he at least give any rational creature the opportunity to effectively know him and love him, with at least the full measure of terrestrial beatitude, in, at the very minimum, a limbo-like setting, even if it's not the beatific vision. And by limbo, I'm not referring to some sort of quasi-hell. I'm referring to a quasi-heaven, of, again, this natural fulfillment of our natural inclinations there, in accordance with our reason. So it's not heaven itself, but it's knowing and loving God. The soul of a rational being, it is intrinsically indestructible also. We have to understand that. That's certainly Christian philosophy and theology holds that. Even the ancient pagan Greek philosophers, and Plato, I cover every semester with my students how well Plato and Socrates demonstrated that, the indestructibility of a rational soul. So it is a matter of metaphysical fact that every rational being will exist forever. That's an ontologically unavoidable fact. Whether in heaven or in hell, or at least in limbo, they will all exist forever. And God must, in accordance with his goodness, his infinite goodness, at least give the opportunity to each rational thing that he makes to know him and love him forever. Okay, so we've settled that this teaching in the Catechism absolutely rules out aliens. So the next thing that these alien believers do is they try to claim that the following teaching in the Catechism, in the next sentence, that this one negates the teaching in the prior sentence, the one we just covered. They approach the Catechism just like a lot of modernists out there approach the Bible. They approach it just assuming that it contradicts itself all over the place. And if it contradicts itself all over the place, then conveniently they can just choose whichever one of the halves of the contradictions that they prefer, that they like most, and they'll just stick with that one. And really, this approach to the Catechism here, on the alien question, it reminds me of a certain priest by the name of Father James Martin, not about aliens, but about another issue. Every single time I've seen someone quote the Catechism, where it points out that homosexual activity is evil and that the homosexual inclination is disordered, clockwork. It's just clockwork. Father Martin will always immediately retort with all vigor that that is wrong. Why? Because the following teaching in the Catechism says that homosexuals must be treated with dignity and respect and charity. And I don't have the quote in front of me, but I'm sure you've read it. So he treats that following teaching in the following sentence as something that overturns the teaching in the sentence before it, which is, of course, pure sophistry, intellectual acrobatics. Both teachings are true. All of them are true. Homosexual acts are evil, the inclination is disordered, and we must treat homosexual persons with respect and charity and dignity, justice. All of that's true. Same thing here. The teaching we just went through in the last few minutes, this stands absolutely solid, no matter what comes after it. The teaching that comes after it does not negate it. So the Father James Martin type approach here applied to the alien issue is also clearly dissenting. The Catechism does not contradict itself. But even if it did, even if the Catechism did contradict itself, the alien believer's argument still would fail to justify that we can, even in obedience to Catholic teaching, believe in the possibility or even existence of aliens. Because the teaching that comes next in this paragraph of the Catechism also does not allow for the possibility of aliens. Let's take a look. Continuing on here, the next teaching here in paragraph 356. He, that is man, is the only creature on earth that God willed for its own sake. And he, man alone, is called to share by knowledge and love in God's own life. Think about that. So the alien believers, what they do, predictably, is they look at this teaching in the Catechism, and they claim that when it says that man is the only creature on earth that God has willed for its own sake, that this means that we can reject what the Catechism said before that clearly indicated that man is the only incarnate creature that exists that is rational. So again, we've got blatant sophistry here. The sentence that we just looked at from the Catechism, the following one in that paragraph, it's emphasizing, sure, of course, yes, it's emphasizing the fact that on earth only man is rational. But there's no hint of an implication there that this isn't true elsewhere also. It's just, 99.9999% of us who aren't astronauts heading off to the moon in the Apollo missions, we will live their entire lives on Earth. So, of course, it makes perfect sense that the Catechism would emphasize that on Earth this is indeed the case. But there's no hint of an implication there that this somehow means that it isn't the case outside of Earth. It jives perfectly well. It coincides perfectly well with the sentence before it. Man is the only rational being on Earth. Fact. He's also the only rational incarnate being in all things. Very simple. But still, there's yet another failure on the part of the alien believers here. Even if, let's for the sake of argument purely here, grant the completely irreverent dissenting notion that the Catechism, that church teaching, can contradict itself. And we're not talking about just the Catechism here. We're talking about paragraphs reiterating an ecumenical council of the church. If you look at the footnotes. So, but even if this church teaching contradicted itself, and that this teaching we just looked at overturns the one before it, even if that were the case, and it's not, that's the alien believer's argument would still completely fail here. And it would fail for a blaringly obvious reason, that it seems, maybe this has been noted somewhere, but I've scoured places and I can't find a single one acknowledging this, a single Catholic alien believer out there acknowledging why it also fails for yet another reason, and it's simple. The alien believers, they almost unanimously insist that aliens are on Earth. They point to Roswell and these things going on in Brazil. They say, some of them even say that the pyramids in Egypt were a result of aliens. So the alien believers are saying that aliens are on Earth. So they're contradicting not only the first teaching of the Catechism we just went through, but also the second one. So there's silly theory after theory. It's all been disproven. There's these supposed aliens walking the earth. There's an explanation for all of them, a natural explanation. Usually it's chimps in experimental jets or something that were burned up. And yeah, if you see an experimental Navy jet crash and this charred body that doesn't look human, but it's a chimp. That's what they do. They send up chimps to test out to see if the circumstances they're exposing them to are amenable to life. But anyway, and the ones that aren't disprovable by natural explanations, scientific explanations we know, that's the real problem here. And that's what I'll get to later. There is demonic stuff going on. And that's why I'm zealous about this. This isn't some academic game that I'm playing like the alien believers are. I'm not just giddy about the possibility about academic speculation here. I'm trying to help you protect your soul against the deceptions that are coming. Anyway, more on that in a moment. So you can't make this fit with church teaching, with the Catechism, with a triply reiterated teaching in this paragraph of the Catechism that itself is reiterating the teachings of an ecumenical council, because they're saying that aliens are on Earth. And yet so what do you do next to try and wiggle out of this teaching? Do you try to do yet another pseudo-intellectual acrobatic move here to say, oh, well, maybe that actually just means all creatures born on Earth. It doesn't even mean all creatures on Earth. We're just talking about all creatures born on Earth. Of all those born on Earth, only man is rational. Because these aliens that are on Earth, they were actually born in some star many trillions of miles away, some solar system countless trillions of miles away, and they have this technology that would be miraculous compared to our technology, and yet all they could do was crash land and get covered up by our incompetent government. I'll get to the utter logical ridiculousness of that in a later video. But anyway, so the alien believers, how do they know that these aliens aren't procreating in their UFOs on Earth? Or wherever they're walking around on Earth, or wherever they were walking around on Egypt, helping build the pyramids or whatever they were doing. This just gets ridiculous and absurd. Of course, you can't make this fit. You can't make this supposition fit with the church teaching that we have here in the Catechism. No matter how much you try and modify it in accordance with your own fancies and whims, it just doesn't work. So, we still, however, are not done here. Because guess what? This second teaching of the Catechism we're going over right now, the one that the alien believers say refutes the first one, it's got a comma. We talked about the first one has a period. It's a complete thought. This one has a comma and the word and, not a period. We've got multiple independent clauses here in this teaching. And even this second teaching reiterates the first one. Because in the second clause, look back at what it says. It says, man alone, comma, and man alone is called to share by knowledge and love in God's own life. So regardless, that's an independent assertion right there. Its own logical coherence does not depend upon the clause that preceded it, nor the clause that preceded it in the sentence before. We've got just yet another, the third insistence in the Catechism here, that only man is rational, of all incarnate, of all visible incarnate beings. Okay, so we've got a triple reiteration that man alone, human beings alone, are the rational incarnate creatures that God has made. There is no restriction. The Catechism gives no hint of a restriction on the scope of this superlative and absolute assertion. There's no other incarnate being that is rational. The end. Now, all of that being said, if you want to tell me that I'm taking the Catechism too seriously, okay. I've received worse criticisms than that. I'll take it. If you want to call me a dumb ox for just opening the Catechism and just believing what it says, well, better men than myself have been called a dumb ox, so I'll take that one too. If you want to call me an anti-intellectual proof texter because I'm not reading one teaching of the Catechism with an exegetical methodology that includes the input of all the catechism's verses when I'm looking at each one, okay, I've been called worse things than that. But I hope that people who would criticize me using those words realize that what they're really saying when they assert that you can't just take the catechism at its word, that you have to employ all sorts of intellectual acrobatics to try and squeeze the real meaning out of what it's actually saying, and that what you're really saying by asserting that by condemning me as just taking the catechism too seriously, what you're really saying is that the catechism is useless. Because the whole point of the catechism is that it makes teaching clear and accessible to anyone who can read. And if it doesn't do that, if you need to have 500 PhDs to apply the proper exegetical approach to interpret each teaching of the catechism in light of the whole catechism, then there's no point in the catechism. Because the catechism's nature is not to present new teachings. It's to be a compendium of existing church teaching. If the catechism doesn't simply mean what it says, if you need all this esoteric knowledge to know what it says, then it's a useless book. But guess what? It is not a useless book. Few things today are as important as taking this book deadly seriously. This is your bulwark. This is your refuge against the great apostasy, the onslaught of which is inundating the church more and more by the day. This is obvious with the moral issues, for example, right now. Has your pastor or your bishop, or let's say this, even someone in the Vatican, I won't name names at the moment, have they come out and said that homosexual relations can be blessed, or now you can use contraception, or you can discern your way into some sort of accompaniment type thing where you can commit adultery and still be in a state of grace, or that abortion maybe can be okay in some circumstances? All you need to do when you're exposed to those arguments, open this up. Just open it up, see what it says on those issues, close it, and then close your mind over those truths. As Chesterton said, the purpose of an open mind is like the purpose of an open mouth, to close it over something solid. And when you've found that solid thing, it's not humble to just remain perpetually open to the contradiction of that thing. Two contradictory assertions cannot both be true. Close your mind over the truth. And of course, be careful to make sure you only do that over the truth. But this is the truth, that man alone, that of all visible beings, only man is rational. It's no different here with this issue, this alien issue, than those moral issues I just went over. Just like those things and many similar ones, elements of the great apostasy's efforts to overthrow the moral law, this alien issue, it's going to be an effort to overthrow the entire faith. A new gospel from the heavens. That as St. Paul prophesied, that those with itching ears, they will no longer tolerate sound teaching, and they will wander into myths, as he said. Our myths today are our sci-fi delusions and deceptions. And there's nothing wrong with some innocent entertainment. I'm not condemning that. But when these sci-fi deceptions start to become the lens through which you interpret reality, when you're excited about these things, instead of being excited about the triumph of Christ and fighting for his kingdom, you start getting excited about what new things we might learn for the aliens, you are priming yourself to succumb to this delusion that Scripture and private revelation have repeatedly warned us is coming in the days that we're living in now. Don't open yourself up to that. Don't even be an agnostic on this question, on the question of aliens. It's what a lot of people will say. Well, I don't know. If aliens show up, then I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. That's what many will say. I'll figure out if they come. I'll figure it out then, whether they're actually aliens or whether they're demons or whatever. Let me just assure you right now, they are demons. They're not aliens, because there are no aliens, and they're coming soon. These non-aliens, these demons who will take any excuse they can to masquerade under the appearance of light. And their most effective masquerade yet in the whole history of the church is, as I talked about with the exorcist Father Dan Rehill, please check the previous videos on my channel, that will be I think this may be a major element of the supreme deception. There's other elements of it coming as well, And I'm going to be coming out with more videos soon about various other deceptions that I think the devil is going to use in the coming days. But aliens might just be the biggest single one. Dialoguing with all humanity. Because guess what? You're not up to the task of dialoguing with demons. You wander into that situation thinking, I'll figure out when the announcement comes from NASA or CERN. I'm going to have a video coming out about that soon as well. The Large Hadron Collider. They just announced that they've made contact with these entities from another dimension or galaxy maybe. I'll have to look into it more. That makes perfect sense that this is how they'd announce it. I'll get to that. I'll refute that soon. But anyway, if you think that, okay, I'll just discern it when that comes, I'll dialogue with that phenomena when it comes, and you think you're up to that task, you are not. Because guess who else also thought she was up to that task? As I discussed in that video, Eve. Eve thought she was up to it. And we know how that played out. So don't be like Eve. Be like Jesus in the desert. He didn't dialogue with the devil, even though he was God. And we're just mere human beings. If he simply rebuked the devil with Scripture. So that's what you need to do. When these so-called aliens show up, they'll be demons. Rebuke them in the name of Jesus. See what happens. So I beg you to do that. I beg you to realize what's going on here. And if anyone watching this is wondering if I'm staking my whole argument against aliens on just these teachings of the Catechism that we just went through, the answer is no. The Catechism, I emphasize this because it should be more than sufficient for a Catholic who wants to be a faithful, obedient, orthodox-minded Catholic. There should be more than sufficient to rule out aliens, and it is. But it's far from the only reason. In fact, it's not even the strongest argument we've got against aliens. There are even more definitive refutations of aliens out there. Those will be coming soon, but I wanted to stick with just in pointing out to everyone today that the Catechism absolutely rules them out. And I hope that's become clear in these last minutes here as you've been watching. So we'll get to those updates later. Please subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned. Get this message out there. As I said earlier, I can't do this alone. I'm a nobody here in my basement trying to get the truth out there with all the big money Catholic outlets just relentlessly promoting alien belief. So I'm relying on you to get this out there. God bless you. Pray for me. Be assured of my prayers for you.